Hey, Mrs. Brady, sixth period psych class. My name is Noah. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you virtually today. I was born a girl, and 4 years ago I transitioned into a guy. When I was about 3, I told my parents that I was really a boy, and they kind of just said, okay, whatever. I told them again when I was 6, and again when I was 9, and again when I was 12. I was watching a TV show at the babysitters, and it ended up being, like a Jerry Springer or Maury or something that isn't too educational. But this one time there actually was something educational, and it was guys trapped in girls' bodies and girls trapped in guys' bodies, and it was interesting because they were all young kids like myself at the time. And I remember thinking to myself, that's the first time I ever thought, holy cow, there's somebody else that's like me. So it was the first time I knew a word to describe what I was feeling, and it was transgender. So about 4 years ago, I started hormone therapy, which is a shot of testosterone. Like a shot that you get at the doctor's, but I do it in my leg, and I have to do it every week. That means I've done 180 shots. That's a lot of shots. There's a lot of stuff that goes on with hormone therapy. Some of the things are reversible. Some of the things are not reversible. Some of the things are permanent in terms of the effects of testosterone. So when I transitioned, I was a female transitioning to male. So I was, a post-pubescent. I had already gone through female puberty, which was awkward for a guy to go through female puberty. It was pretty bad. But I essentially was, reversing everything that already happened. My voice dropped. I have a lower voice than I did when I was, in high school. I have facial hair. I have body hair. Actually, something that sounds kind of weird is my body actually smells different, and it feels differently than when I was in high school. My skin is actually rougher than my girlfriend's, or than it used to be, and my body kind of has a different smell. My sweat smells different, which is kind of weird, but it's all part of the transition part. So at some point, your menstrual cycle will end, and it essentially is menopause, which is interesting because I was going through menopause and guys' puberty at the same time. Talk about hot flashes. So I was talking to my mom one day about menopause, and I was actually telling her about what it was going to be like for her to go through menopause because I had already gone through it. Kind of weird. Less than a year after I started hormones, I decided to have top surgery, which is basically a double mastectomy. They remove the breasts off my chest and create a male chest. I decided to do that because, unfortunately, I was well endowed. I had a binder, which is it's kind of like a tank top that is it's compressive, so it kind of keeps everything all together and pressed against you, and that kind of worked. But I really wanted to be able to go swimming without, like every other guy does, without a shirt on. I wanted to not have to wear a sports bra or things like that. So I decided to have top surgery, and it's been amazing. I'm able to swim. I love swimming. I was born and raised on the river. My family owns a marina, so I've been swimming since I was little. But during high school, I didn't really swim ever, unless I was going, like water skiing or something, and that's because I had a life jacket on, and I didn't really swim much because I didn't want to wear a bathing suit. It was kind of embarrassing to me because most guys wear shorts and like their swim trunks. In terms of transitioning, how did other people react to me? I told my parents, and they never kicked me out of the house or anything like that, so I was very lucky in that respect. They didn't really understand it. They didn't talk about it for about a year. It wasn't until I scheduled my consultation for top surgery that they actually started calling me Noah. They, up until that point, had called me my given name, and still used female pronouns, as did my brother and sister. And it wasn't until I scheduled my top surgery consultation that they started calling me Noah. They slowly started asking questions and things like that to try to, learn more about me, about being trans, and how to help. So my parents, slowly they came around. My brother, he disowned me, which I didn't know, which is kind of funny. We were pretty close, and when I told him that I was trans, or actually I guess my mom told him that I was trans, he stopped talking to me. Now, at the same time, we were both in college, and I just kind of thought that, we're both in college, we don't talk much. I didn't know that he had decided to disown me. He then told me he had disowned me, and I told him to make sure the next time he does that to tell me so I can be offended by it. But it was hard for him because he's, at that point he was fairly religious, and he didn't really understand how it fit in with his religion and his beliefs. Kind of just figuring out how it fit into his religion. That was his biggest thing. And once he decided to become open about it and talk to me more, he had done a lot of research on his own, and so when we finally talked, he knew a lot of the appropriate terms and the procedures and things like that, which was very impressive. And I was very grateful that he had done that much research because we hadn't talked in such a long time. So once we talked, and he, after a couple of weeks or so, he actually became one of my biggest allies. My sister, she looked up to me. I was her older sister, and so when I transitioned, I think part of her was scared and sad and didn't really know how to respond to me. But she still, to this day, still comes to me with girl problems because she knows I can relate to them. So it was interesting for her to find out that at 12, her older sibling is going to change gender. And I'm not sure how she dealt with it because I was in college and I didn't really see it. But I know that she had to answer a lot of questions that she shouldn't have had to answer. And it's really interesting because once it comes to something like sexual orientation or gender identity, people think it's okay to start talking about sex and body parts and really inappropriate things. Body parts and sex don't typically come up in conversation with strangers or people that you're not necessarily very close with until they find out that you are either gay or bi or trans. And as soon as they find out that, they think it's appropriate to start asking about body parts, like what's in your pants or how do you have sex, things like that. It's really interesting how that happens. My sister was 12 at the time, and she was having people ask her those questions. She doesn't know how to respond to it, and these are really intense questions that she doesn't want to think about and is now forced to think about. It was really hard for her, and she ended up transferring, for a multitude of reasons, but one of them was she didn't have to answer the questions anymore. She didn't want to. She wanted to just be able to be herself and not have to think about what's going on with her brother. It's none of her business. She didn't really know how to respond to it, and it gets frustrating. How has gender identity affected my life? It has actually been one of the coolest things that has ever happened. Up until I transitioned, I was boring. I was a fairly happy-go-lucky person on the outside. Um, Through high school and the beginning of college, I became increasingly more frustrated, and I went through a short depression. Um, but now that I've transitioned, um, I I do a lot of presentations on what it's like to be transgender, and it's really cool because there are people who have preconceived notions of trans people and what it's like to be trans, and how they're all creepy and just weird things like that. And then I talk to them and we develop like a relationship, whether it's over 5 minutes or over a friendship, over a couple of years, things like that. And I have friends who I've known for like 2 years. Actually, in my house here in Rochester, um, I live with a few guys, and two of the guys that I live with, they don't know that I'm trans. They have no idea, and it's because it's never come up. It's never come up in conversation. Um, it's just a part of my life that happened. Um, but I have moved on, and whatever. I tend to joke that I'm a professional transsexual, and that I do presentations like this. I go to colleges and I go to high schools and things like that and talk to people about what it's like to be trans, and so I get to do that, and I wouldn't have done that otherwise. So I get to kind of smash stereotypes because people have pretty nasty views of what trans people look like or what they act like or something. And when they meet me and we develop these relationships, and then they find out, or I tell them that I'm trans if it ever comes up as to be an appropriate time to talk about it. You know, it completely blows their mind because I don't appear to match their perception of what a trans person acts like or looks like or something like that. Yeah, it's interesting. So please keep your minds open when you meet people. You never know what they're going through, what they've been through. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you again, and we'll see you soon.